Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and it's my favourite part of my Thursday, I've got to say. It's me and JP Mason talking all things Celtic for an hour. And I'll tell you something before we go anywhere. Let's talk about that jersey over your right shoulder, JP, because, yes, it's a Hampden memory, but I'm not being funny. I just think in time, I've grown to love that wacky away jersey that's behind you. Talk me through it.
That's not bought off eBay. That's an original. That is my original from when I was a wee guy. Still in remarkable
great condition.
Nick, I had a bit of a disaster recently with some strips. I don't know if I said that on air or off air, but I put strips in at too high a wash, including the cup final Dembele New Balance one, and the New Balance badge is melted, and I'm going to need to see if my guy at Football Creatio can fix it up, because I can't have that top desecrated like that, because it's too good. It's one of the best New Balance ones, I think. That and the Lisbon line, the 67 2017 one. If anything happened to that, I would be probably in tears. But no, that the cheese and onion top. I always think of the Ruttles song. You know the Beatles pastiche band. They've got a song called Cheese and Onion. I think it's called Cheese and Onion, and I think of that when I see that. And Pierre Van Hooijdonk and Hampden.
I was going to say, what player does it remind you of? And it was that season where, albeit Hampden isn't our home stadium, we played our home games at Hampden, and we played a few home games wearing that jersey. I know that was a discussion that was raised recently when we wore our away jersey at home to raise awareness of homelessness in Glasgow. I always remember back to the replica of that, and it looks as though yours is the same. The collar was a nightmare. It just wouldn't sit properly.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was the material.
It's made of material. It was a really strange choice of material to have as the collar, because, like you say, it doesn't really sit. Like, you can see it's kind of like bent up a bit, and it doesn't. I think when I was a wee guy, I would cantona it and have it up.
Back in the days. And it had the crest with the sandpaper behind it, so you'd need to wear something under it or your nipples would just get destroyed if you wear that one of the fives.
A big shield as well. I think it totally divided opinion. I remember people at the time thinking it was honking, but I like it. I mean, there's not many strips I don't like. The pink and the silver one, and the silver and pink are probably the two that I would least like out of all of them.
We walked down memory lane. We're not doing this to punt my book, but that is in it, and it was one of the hardest jerseys to find, by the way, JP. I eventually got one that was fully signed. I think it was number 15. Classic Umbro numbers on the back, long sleeves, tremendous. Anyway, let's get on to the tagline, the Kilmarnock game this weekend. We'll start off with Giakoumakis because another suitor has emerged. We knew about the interest from Japan. We knew that Sampdoria were interested in trying to save their Serie A season. But this morning, we've been hearing from a very good source in L'Equipe magazine, French magazine, that Bordeaux have offered what can only be described as a derisory 2.6 million quid.
I knew you were going to use derisory. I knew it. It says insulting on that tagline, but I knew you were going to say derisory. I would have probably put my flat in it that you were going to say that. So
I had to say something different from the tagline, but that was the first one that came to mind.
I know, but derisory is a hand-picked word that you would use in relation to such a bid. What was it, 2 million or 3 million?
What I saw this morning was 2.6, JP. But the thing is, we're in a great position, both with him and Juranovic. And this is what's I find a bit bemusing, a little bit bizarre, is the fact that you've got Giakoumakis. Yes, he's not playing, but he, as a player now, I asked the question. I know Kevin was getting to this point yesterday with John and Paddy. Has his value stagnated or decreased since he came to Celtic? Of course it hasn't. I mean, that's what we paid for him. I mean, he was talking about Juranovic, obviously, how your value of a player and the status of a World Cup, third medal winner, a bronze medal winner, now having Champions League experience, under his belt. How can that player only be worth 5 or 6 million quid, or in Bordeaux's case, only be worth 2.6? It's insulting. And Celtic are in a good position, OJP. We've got the guys on good contracts. We're not hard up for cash. We're in control of this situation. But we clearly are looking to offload Juranovic because we've replaced them already. We're trying to replace Giakoumakis by the looks of it. But we could be left in a position where we've got 3 international right backs at the club and 3 international centre forwards at the club. By the way, not a bad thing, but it's trying to keep the guys happy if that is the case at the end of January. Do you think that's possible? I mean, we're not desperate to take any old offer and get them out the door.
Well, I just had a read this morning of some of the patter associated with Giakoumakis, and there seems to be all sorts of different permutations with regards to would it be a loan to Sampdoria and a buy on the proviso that they stay up, which isn't exactly a cast iron certainty, is it?
Exactly.
You can't. I don't really understand what would happen if they didn't go up, but Giakoumakis comes back to us, and then we're back to square one in the summer with a player who's 6 months older at his age again, which is a factor in all of this. And the Japanese club, again, I don't know if you saw Anthony Joseph on Celtic Fans TV with Paul. It was a really good, worth watching if anybody hasn't seen it. Just quite insightful to hear from a prominent journalist talking Celtic. Obviously, he's a Celtic fan, but there's quite a few things he kind of said in that interview that the Monza thing maybe isn't as certain as people would think, and he said he couldn't say too much, but that there was other major clubs at the table for Juranovic. It wouldn't necessarily be as low ball a bid as 7 million that he would go for. And then just other things I've picked up on from other things I've read and heard is that Giakoumakis' preference would be to stay in Europe rather than go to Japan. And also I think maybe it was Liam on Celtic Down Under was saying that the Japanese pay structure, it wouldn't make any sense for them to pay a high fee for Giakoumakis because of the way that the Japanese football economy works. So they wouldn't necessarily be shelling out a big fee and big wages on Giakoumakis. So that would be an unlikely destination for him. Obviously, there seems to be a lot of clubs in for him. Germany, Italy. You would think surely there would be English interest as well. I mean, they're not blind to what's been going on and with Giakoumakis and his play up here. He's not been a terrible signing by any stretch. I mean, he's been successful. He's just been unfortunate. The only reason he got that break last season was because of Kyogo's injury.
Yeah,
he wouldn't have got in to do what he did without Kyogo being injured for that length of time. So Kyogo hasn't been injured this season, to my memory. Certainly not for any length of time. So he's not had that opportunity to come in. And Kyogo's obviously produced the goods while he's not been playing. So the Bordeaux thing, if that is true, to come in with an offer like that is wild. To basically offer us the same as what we paid for him
it's derisory.
A year and a half ago. It's derisory. Yeah. So I don't know how the powers that be will see that when that comes in. Will they just kind of just bat it away? Will they try and negotiate upwards? Because you're not going to go from, surely Bordeaux are not going to go from 2 million or 2 and a bit million to 5 million or 6 million. There's no way they're going to lowball it and then suddenly go, oh, actually, here's double what we initially offered.
I often wonder how the offers come in these days. Remember, it used to be fax machines, You used to fax in an offer. And I remember watching, it was on one of the old, it might have been St. and Greavesy actually, and it was Barry Fry when offers were coming in and he's sitting there and he used to have one of these wee plinths with a hammer like he's at the court. And every time he'd done a deal, he would hit it. But people would fax in offers and fax in deals and all that kind of stuff. How is it actually done now, JP? Agents on the phone, surely.
I think there's obviously stuff goes on with phone calls before it even goes to clubs. I know that's illegal, essentially, but you've got to look at the stuff that's going on with Cantwell and Beale and all that, like him being asked about it, and then them saying that Norwich saying they've not had a bid or anything like that. But I mean, he's in the position, like any player that's out of contract in January, they can speak to anybody they want, can't they? And can they not surely speak to them via any medium? So if he's got Beale's phone number, I'm sure that deal, if it's in the works, it's in the works, and it's got nothing to do with the club or a fax machine or an email or a telephone call to the club. It'll be between the manager and the player.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't imagine. I mean, how could they possibly trace it if a club has come in for Giakoumakis and they've not gone direct to Celtic, they've gone direct to the player or the player's agent? How would they know that that's happened? They wouldn't.
It'll be an absolute minefield, and it'll be a bit of a cesspit as well, especially in January at this stage. I'm looking at the two situations, and I've already said that I've accepted that Juranovic is leaving, but at the same time, JP, he is at the peak of his value. He is. He's hit the peak. I mean, at no point are we going to have a right back Croatian who's just started the World Cup. He's never going to be valued or worth more money to Celtic than he is right now. The performance at Ibrox will have no bearing in the value of the player. And I just think that, it's one of these ones where if you get a couple of clubs who really need a right back, and that could develop between now and the end of January, other moves happening, people moving a right back out, and then they enter the race with Juranovic. So I don't really have much in the way of fears about that. And I do think we're going to get more than what's been quoted. Mm-hmm. For all intents and purposes, JP, at this stage, it's all paper talk. That's all it is. And that same paper talk's telling us that X, Y, and Z across the city are worth 10, 20, 30, and all this nonsense that we've been reading for years. So at this moment in time, I am going to be looking at some of the fees with the same kind of level of trust as I have done with some of the bizarre transfer fees that we've been reading about in the past. Bordeaux, when I read it, the first player that came to my mind when I read Bordeaux?
Dugarry?
George O'Boyle. George O'Boyle played with Bordeaux.
Wildly opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. Remember George O'Boyle, Northern Irish internationalist? He signed for Dunfermline from Bordeaux. And they also signed this Van Cosma from Bordeaux. I mean, they were spending big money. Bizarre times.
George O'Boyle, who missed the chance at 1-0 against for St Johnstone in the 98 game.
Yeah, Johnny Gould saved it.
I don't know if I've ever actually seen that, but I remember it being, because I was listening to the game on the radio, and I remember it being described on the radio and just picturing it and thinking, my God, that's how close we were to potentially losing that league title from that one chance. Did he? Was it a header or did he sky it?
It was a header, and it was Johnny Gould saved it. And I think it's moments like that. We've been talking about moments of a season, JP. Mm-hmm. Like a tackle that Carter Vickers makes in the box at Ibrox. McGregor taking a red card against Motherwell. Little moments throughout the season. That particular campaign will always remember Bratback's goal. We'll always remember Larsson's goal. Of course we will, right? We'll remember the Burley and Lambert game at the New Year, all these little moments through the season. But there's other ones that kind of go under the radar a wee bit. And I think you've just raised one. The George O'Boyle chance, and Johnny Gould saves it. And there's a guy, Johnny Gould, who was like third choice goalkeeper at Bradford when we signed him. Bizarre. Aye, but I love as you might have guessed, I love the walk down memory lane. So Bordeaux, we're thinking Cosma, O'Boyle, and somebody else that might appeal to you, Eric Cantona, former Bordeaux player as well. Yeah. I used to have a video, VHS video, like it was a massive big bit of plastic for all the kids tuning in, by the way. And it was a Cantona video when he was at Man United. It was brilliant. It was called Ua Cantona. It was an official release, JP, but it dug into all these earlier clubs, Montpellier, Bordeaux, Marseille, and some of the stuff he got up to was frightening, like waist-high challenges. Waist-high challenges against Nantes. Unfortunately, it was Nemo Johnson, although Johnston did run towards him and then kind of thought better of it. Oh, man, taking his jersey off and throwing it into the dugout and all that. Brilliant. Track it down. I doubt that it ever made DVD. But
speaking of removing parts of the football kit in games, when I lived in France, I went to a Bordeaux Monaco game in Monaco, and it was like tail end of the season, and I may have told this story before, and if I have, apologies to anybody who's heard it before, but if I have told it, I've only told it once, and it might have been like 2 years ago or something. But on the way into the ground, I had a Celtic tracky top on, and I met George Graham, as we were going into the
Did you?
turnstile. And I turned to him and I just went, George Graham, how you doing? You're a long way from... No, I said, what are you up to? And then he looked at my tracking and he went, you're a long way from home. And I said, I am living in Nice for uni. And he was like, all right. I says, you here to watch a player? And he went, might be. And because he was Spurs manager at the time.
Yeah.
And it turned out that he was there to watch John Arne Riise. And he didn't get him because obviously Riise went from Monaco to Liverpool. But that night, Riise scored an absolute raker for Monaco. And they won. They effectively won the league that night. And Dugarry was playing for Bordeaux, but Marco Simone was playing for Monaco as well. And at the end of the game, when they were celebrating with the fans, he basically stripped his jockstrap. He threw everything into the crowd.
He done a Ronnie Dyler.
Everything. Shinnies, top, the whole shebang. It's a pretty vivid memory. I'm going to look that game up actually. I don't think I've ever watched the highlights of it, but you'll be able to find them.
I'm also going to look up that tackle against Nantes from Cantona. I love this. Some brilliant comments coming in. Keep them coming. Loads to discuss today. Obviously, we've got Kilmarnock coming up at the weekend. Loads of other topics of discussion with comings and goings. It is January after all. I'm going to pull this one up because I've been looking with interest. Obviously, a heavy user of Twitter and Facebook, mainly Twitter. And, you know, I do look at a lot of the opinions coming through and I can sense a wee bit of concern, JP, amongst some Celtic fans around this transfer window for a couple of reasons. I don't think we can say that we've not done our business early. We've got 3 guys in the door. We were at the most recent press conference and that's up on the channel now. And I think we've done our business pretty quickly. It's mainly the departures, I would guess, and obviously the signing or the supposed signing in Cho, and I know that's not how you pronounce his name, but I will learn the correct pronunciation of him coming in. Jungle Lion raises something similar. Strange to have a transfer window so chaotic under Ange, usually all done and dusted. Are there any concerns? I've seen the, Lowell's in the building, everything.
Man, that's the most mental.
I'm not subscribing to that. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not either. No chance. I just think it doesn't. The chips don't always fall the way you want them to fall. It's football at the end of the day, to use a cliche. I mean, we've been fortunate that a lot of our transfers under Ange Postecoglou in the last 18 months have been relatively hassle-free, really well done in terms of the finance aspect, the fees, what we've paid for players, as has been pointed out on Twitter in a rebuff to the whole, Celtic spend a load of money and Ange is a lucky man and all this sort of stuff. Like that can get in the bin, that narrative. But so we have been fortunate that things seem to have been done. And whenever you get a good thing in life, you then expect it to be like that all the time. And so, when you're going into a different market, as we are in this case, I think it's quite right to point out the differences in South Korea and Japan, as well as China, as has been pointed out this week by several people online. There are differences, and the South Korea football market and financial structure is completely different to Japan, I would imagine. So therefore, this is our first foray into it. So how could we possibly expect to just breeze in there? We're like, here's the papers, sign here, we're Celtic, we're brilliant, we're the champions, we're playing the Champions League, forget about everything else, Minnesota, whatever, Mainz, whatever, that we're the team you want to sign for. That may well be people's attitude, and that's fine, but it doesn't always work like that when you're dealing with a player who, again, was pointed out in Paul's interview with Anthony Joseph, and I wasn't aware of this. But the guy is like hot property in South Korea. He's like front page of the Vogue in South Korea.
Saw that. Is he the first Celtic player, or potentially Celtic player, to have appeared in Vogue magazine? Because I was thinking Freddie Ljungberg.
I don't think Neil Lennon's 2003 calendar shots were used.
That was a great calendar. That was brilliant.
Was it a calendar or was it?
It was. Aye.
Was it an actual
range? There was a whole Lennon merchandise range, and it was separate from Celtic. It was his own thing.
There was one where he was like standing at the bottom of like a kind of chestnut staircase, wearing I can't
oversized trousers. It was a suit he had on, aye.
remember.
And then there was the one, we're not taking a dig at Lenny, by the way, and there was the one with the hood up and the furry and all that. It was like really staring down the lens.
He left himself wide open to be ridiculed for that. I mean, it was pretty mental images.
And remember the photo shoot of Dirk Borigta that he did as well?
No,
Topless. No, did you miss that? You just Google it, JP.
I mean,
most won't be disappointed.
Most people miss Dirk Borigta's entire Celtic career, so I mean, it's no surprise that you would miss a photo shoot they might have done at the time.
It was terrible.
But no,
there was a belt involved. That's what I'm saying.
Oh Christ! But there was the Cho. How is it not Cho? By the way, I mean that must be how you pronounce it.
I heard someone correcting the pronunciation to something closer to like Q, okay. Something like that. So I'm going with Cho until we sign him.
Unlike other podcasts, I haven't done my research on that particular subject, so I can't profess to know how to pronounce South Korean names, and I'm not going to pretend to do so. But no, Anthony Joseph was saying on Paul's interview that he's on the front cover of Vogue. He's got 3 million Instagram followers. Yeah. He's a total heartthrob. So it's, as well as the football side of things, obviously he's a good footballer, plays for his national team, scored at the World Cup, has a good level of proficiency in the league that he plays in, is clearly hot property in terms of there's demand for him and there's a sort of bidding war going on. From a marketing point of view as well, Celtic tapping into that could be very lucrative, and not to go down the lazy route of shirt sales in South Korea will go through the roof as a result, but just commercially, full stop, in terms of awareness of Celtic in South Korea will be more prominent as a result of signing what is effectively kind of like signing their Beckham. You know,
that's exactly what I was thinking. Just, when you were thinking about the word derisory, I was just waiting for you to say Beckham there, because the Vogue, the photo shoots, the followers, the whole thing. But the reason I asked about Vogue is, didn't Freddie Ljungberg, am I getting mixed up with some Calvin Klein advert he did or something? I thought Ljungberg was on the cover of some...
Again, I didn't pay much attention to Freddie Ljungberg before he signed for Celtic, and there was no reason to pay attention to him very much while he was at Celtic, because he did... Very little.
Yeah.
One of those fabled EPL signings that come in, then you kind of sort of scratch your head when they arrive, because you're like, what is he really going to do? Like Juninho, like, I don't know, Dion Dublin, and there's a litany of players that have come up at the ash end of their career, to put it kindly or mildly. And I guess Ljungberg was one of them, so I'm not aware of his Vogue appearances. But this signing, if it does go ahead, it's a big one, I think.
Yeah, it definitely is. And talking about jock straps as well, JP, it brings to mind that Ronny Deila did that with his previous club in Norway, and he was asked in one of his early press conferences if he would be doing it up here, and he did say that he did want to do it because he was carrying a few extra pounds when he done it in Norway. And he's been working out in preparation, but he never did. And that's fine. I'm happy with that.
He wouldn't have done 8:30 on Tuesday night, that's for sure, because I was playing outside at Torrey Glen on Tuesday night, and it was sideways rain and wind. Actually, not that bad when we were playing, but the moment that we stopped, it was like someone just flicked a switch and it just went. And it was. He wouldn't have been doing anything as mad as that, I don't think, on Tuesday night, that's for sure, in January.
No, I'm glad I'm retired. I came out of retirement to play for the old boys team that Acsom sponsor, and who were managed by Frank McGarvey, and it gave me a great opportunity to get to know Frank a wee bit better, and obviously his funeral details have been confirmed for Monday, so we'll be able to pay our respects to Frank on Monday as well. There is a link, actually. The family have asked, instead of flowers to be sent, there's a link to a charitable page that you're able to donate to pancreatic cancer. So I shared that link actually just before we came on both Facebook and on Twitter as well, if you want to make a donation. Billy Boy 32 could also be preparing the ground for the departure of Hatate and O'Reilly. Listen, we've just been talking about Ljungberg and Borigta, right? And if you're going to suggest for a moment, Billy, that Hatate and O'Reilly are leaving the building, that might just push us over the edge. I don't want to think about that. I'm just getting my head around Giakoumakis and Juranovic potentially leaving. And I think that had they were to leave, especially with us actively seeking a replacement for Giakoumakis, it would seem, I could take that. I couldn't take Jota, Carter Vickers, Hatate or O'Reilly or any of these guys leaving at this moment in time. JP, I'm not ready for that yet.
No, I'm not either, but I'm well aware that in our current climate and the way that things are operating, and I think people should probably prepare themselves for the departure of one or two or both of them, hopefully not at the same time. I think given what Postecoglou said about not falling in love with your idols and all that, it's very hard to just brush that away, because obviously everyone does. There's no doubt about it. But I think he's got a grasp of structuring a way that it's not devastating and that everyone leaves at the same time. Because you saw with him going back to Yokohama Marinos for Iwata, he didn't want to take Iwata and Maeda at the same time out of respect. Mm-hmm. So I think he's aware of. It's pretty cool. He's aware of the impact of two big players leaving a club at the same time. So I think he would be more likely to stress that can't happen with us, in the sense that we couldn't have a transfer window where Hatate and O'Reilly both leave. Like, it would probably need to be staggered. I would hope that they're not pushing for a move or anything like that. I've obviously got no knowledge of that. There's not been any hint of that in the press, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. There might be agreements made with players that, this is your time that we'll look for a move for you. I mean, we would be pretty naive to think that somebody as good as O'Reilly and Hatate would be here for the next 4 or 5 years, put it that way. I mean, that it's a bit pie in the sky, that I think we've got to be aware. Although I did see somebody shared an article, not an article, like a thread from a site that favours another team, and the guy was opining that we needed to have a fire sale because there was, we're in dire straits financially, and posted some sort of mythical figure of 24 million that we were in the hole, or I can't remember how he or she came up with that, but basically saying that we needed to sell a bunch of players, and I don't think that's the case at all. But there is a case to say that there will be sales at some point of players of that ilk, and it could be Jota, it could be Cameron Carter-Vickers. I mean, there's been plenty of chat in the last week about people in their 40s saying that Carter-Vickers is the best centre-half they've seen at Celtic in their lifetime. And I think one was brought up on Super Scoreboard, and Hugh Keevins was like, "Oh, well, I think Billy McNeil would have a lot to say about it." He was like, "No, in my lifetime, I didn't see Billy McNeil play Hugh." But I mean, there is an argument, I would say, that Carter-Vickers is in the mix for centre-half I've seen. And that is...
I was going to ask you, because that obviously it's an ever-changing thing, JP, right? And I got asked that question a few years back. So I wrote my starting 11 from players that I had seen. And the only reason Danny McGrain didn't get in it, I'm supporting Celtic, I'm watching him on the telly, I didn't see him in the flesh because he left in 87 and I started going to the games in 87. And in actual fact, when I was at my first game, which was the Tommy Burns testimonial, McGrain was there. He came on the park to say his farewell. He didn't get a chance to say farewell under Davy Hay the previous season. But my two centre-halves, I've got them in my mind right now, but I'm interested to hear who yours are and how close Carter-Vickers is to breaking into your greatest 11.
I would say mine are Mialbi.
Mm-hmm.
And
signed him as a midfielder as well.
I remember that. I remember it was Mingos that signed him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mialbi and Van Dijk. And Van Dijk, not because of what he's done since. I told you before about taking Brendan to a game, and Brendan has got no skin in the game, but is a mad football fan. And within 5 minutes was just like, who the hell is that guy? And I was like, oh, that's Virgil van Dijk. He's, we signed him for $2.5 million. He's already looking like a snip at that. And Brendan was just like, head and shoulders, he's the best player in that park. And he'll go he'll go on to do well or whatever. But and then neither of us could have possibly predicted that he would win the European Cup or the league with Liverpool.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Van Dijk gets into my team, JP, but he is partnered by Paul Elliott, and I think Elliott played in a really poor Celtic side, but you could see the talent was there. I mean, in terms of tackling, he was unbelievable. He was incredible, aerially and tackling. And I think that the partnership as well was kind of thinking about they two could have played together. Van Dijk, the elegance, the striding out from the back, spraying balls around, taking players on, and then Elliott at the back gives you that, that belief that no matter what happens, that the back door's kind of locked. Where's CCV in your thinking? Is he far away from that?
No, he's not at all. I mean, it's a small sample size, but then Van Dijk was ultimately a small sample size.
Yeah.
But the performances Carter Vickers has been putting in, they're unbelievable. The guy's immense in every game. The stat about him and Starfelt's partnership stretching every game for every game they've played, they're unbeaten in what equates to a league season. That partnership. Yeah. I think hearing Hugh Keevins calling Starfelt bang average and things like that. It's like, you're putting all the success down to our defence is down to Carter Vickers. I don't think so. You can't be a one-man defence.
There's a bitterness there with Hugh Keevins. I've interviewed him, and there is a bitterness, JP. I mean, he wrote Tommy Burns' book. He wrote various other Celtic books as well. He's a Celtic fan. We spoke about that before I interviewed him. I went through to the studio, where is it, in Clydebank, and it was ages ago. It's on the channel. It's on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. You'll be entered into a prize draw, by the way. But during that interview, it was quite clear he was a Celtic fan leading up to it. But as soon as the mic goes on, he becomes Hugh Keevins, the radio personality. I'm not going to give him too much of a hard time here, but I just think sometimes there's a chip on his shoulder. Remember, he was banned for the social club on London Road. Do you remember that? I think at certain times he's been banned for Celtic Park. And, I listen to him now, and I just sometimes think that people say things, not just Hugh Keevins, but generally, anyone who has a platform or even social media, just to get a reaction, just to get some attention, because it's better than no attention. And some of the things he says, they just don't stack up.
Well, people would argue back and be like, well, that's why he's still employed by Clyde for Super Scoreboard, because he generates discussion. We're talking about him right now. So, yeah. and plenty of other people talk about him, plenty of other people call in to dispute what he's said. But with regards to the Starfelt thing, that narrative does ripple throughout the Celtic support as well. There's still people that will not think
he's a bomb scare. Yeah,
I think he's a bomb scare and won't put respect on his name for the things that he's done. And you're like, well, what if he's standing with his both hands in the league trophy at the end of the season? Does he not get a cheer from the crowd because he's a bomb scare and he's not been responsible for that moment as he was last season? He was massively responsible for us lifting the league title, and it's like, oh, some people get the credit and others don't, and you're like, well, it's a collective. Like, if everyone's played 60, 70, 80, 90% of the games, then they've contributed to that success. Like, it's exactly the same as Anthony Ralston didn't play every game last season, but would you not say that he massively contributed to the title? Yes, he did. Obviously,
one of the biggest cheers for me, Tony Ralston.
I know, totally. The goal at Ross County is one thing, but many other aspects of his game and in games last season were huge contributing factors to us winning the title. And I just don't know how anyone can. It would be weird for me if I'd criticised a player over and over and over and constantly replied to Twitter threads or YouTube posts going, nah, Starfelt for me. So what do? You're a Celtic season ticket holder at that point when Starfelt lifts the trophy. Is it a kind of nah, not applauding him, no for me, he's no good enough? Or is it a kind of polite golf clap? Or is it a, way, I'll actually forget everything I've said in the last year and applaud this guy? So
one of the recent examples of that, I think, And by the way, I'm not sitting here criticising Celtic fans because I've done it. You know, I've watched the game and had a perception of a performance. But recently, I watched it back. Was the Rangers game, the 2-2 game, and Starfelt was getting a lot of abuse for his performance in that game. And I don't know if it was because of the moments, you know, that particularly the penalty decision, the fact people look at that and say, well, he was rash. He gave the ref a decision to make. I get that. I don't think it was a penalty, incidentally, but he gave a penalty away. But when I watched it back, I thought he had a decent game. I thought he was fairly solid, to be honest with you, you know.
Quite
And
a lot of people said the same thing.
yeah, and I agree with Jim Orr. I think he's much better at the defensive bit. This sounds daft, but when you're playing for a team like Celtic, there's so much onus on possession and passing, and you know the two centre halves. You know the heat map, the passing heat map that you get between those two centre halves is huge. You know they play the ball so often to each other. You've got to be comfortable on the ball. Invariably, because of where he's playing, it's on his weaker foot. So I understand that he doesn't look comfortable in those situations, but his anticipation, his tackling, his heading, I think ticks all those defensive qualities that you're looking for. And obviously, he's got the backing of the gaffer. But whilst we're on the subject of centre halves, let's open up a wee bit about that as well, because there are now reports that we're going to listen to offers for Welsh. So it would suggest that he's on his way out as well, JP. And this is something we've spoken about before, because it was always my view that he's a player who, at his age, must play far more football and more regularly. He's not going to get it at the moment. In front of him, it would appear you've got Carter Vickers, Starfelt, Kobayashi, and potentially even Jens. He's maybe the fifth choice centre half. So maybe the second or third choice, probably the third choice left-sided centre half. But my suggestion was you put him out on loan until Jens's loan deal runs out, and then you decide between the two players, one who you already own, one who you can let go back to his parent club. Who do you keep? But it sounds as though we're willing to let him go this time round. Are you happy with that? Are you surprised?
I think just before we wrap up on the Starfelt thing, I am not saying that I've never been critical of players. And if you look back in the last 2 years that I've been doing this with you, or any other post-match during lockdown, which was horrendous, watching games in here and then just moving slightly over and sitting and then talking about them, having had no real experience of being at the game or anything. I've probably been critical of players, but I don't hold on to vendettas against players, and I allow a player to change my mind, whether that's on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, however that is. I don't immediately write players off unless they're ball and golly. That's a different story. I was never convinced by him. I never will be convinced by him.
Where is ball and golly? Where is he?
I have no idea.
Just while you're talking about it, I'm going to find out.
Aye, fair enough. But on the Welsh thing, it's obviously you want. I've said before, I want to see Scottish players playing for Celtic, as many as possible. I mean, I think at the weekend, Callum McGregor was the only Scottish player in the park. I actually think that was the case. In the starting lineup, if I remember rightly, there wasn't another Scottish player, and I just don't like that imbalance of imports versus Scottish. I think that you need to have a core of Scottish players, but obviously those Scottish players need to be good enough to be playing week in, week out for Celtic, and I certainly wouldn't ever suggest that we accommodate Scottish players just because they're Scottish at the expense of the quality of the overall side. Obviously, I'm delighted that we've got the talents that we've got in the squad from places that we've never had before. We've never had an Argentinian playing for Celtic before, but now we do. We've potentially never had a South Korean playing for us. We will shortly, potentially, hopefully. So there is that, but Stephen Welsh is obviously at a point in his career where he's quite a bit away from getting to play first team football for Celtic. You've got a solid partnership of Carter Vickers and Starfelt, who I only said 5 minutes ago, when they've played together, they've gone a full season undefeated in their games. So that in itself is difficult to dislodge. You've just got a new signing in Kobayashi coming in, who puts you further down the pecking order. You've got Jens as well, who also puts you down the pecking order for the time being anyway.
Yeah.
But 6 months is a long time in football, and Jens is going to be here until the end of the season. So, Welsh is clearly sought after from various different corners of Europe and maybe America as well. Has America been mentioned?
That's right. Yeah, MLS. Yep.
So he's probably looking at guys like Lewis Morgan and Liam Henderson and Josh Doig, Lewis Ferguson, all guys probably around his age. Maybe they're a year or two older than him, but ultimately he'll have been in schoolboy teams with them. He'll have played against them at youth level and all that, and he'll be comparing himself to them at this point in time and going, wait a minute, these guys are all
especially when you captain of the under-21s, Scotland under-21s captain, JP. So if he's looking at his contemporaries, he's making the move over to Italy. In Hickey's case, coming back and playing for Brentford and all that, and Ferguson's playing brilliantly over there, as is Doig, who you mentioned. I think he's a couple of years younger. But you're right, that pool of players, he must be looking at that and going, I'm kicking my heels, sometimes not even on the bench, and they're just constantly bringing in players from all over the world. I'm not going to get a sniff here.
You obviously have to think about the fact that he's clearly a Celtic fan. And that would present a difficulty to me if I was Stephen Welsh, because there would be nothing prouder to me than to even just sit in a Celtic tracksuit on a bench. Never mind
carry the hampers.
I'm there. Maybe not at his age. Maybe not at his age. At his age, you definitely would want to be playing. But there is that emotional pull of being at Celtic and being a first team player at Celtic, whether you're playing like a starting 11 player or if you're in the squad and you've got the opportunity to play. Even having that opportunity to play at times, you'd be like, oh God, I want to do that. I want to still have the opportunity to contribute to Celtic's success. But he has to sort of assess the situation and realise that he has a decent bit away from being that player.
Yeah, for sure. Just a couple of things. Bolly Bolingoli is now playing plying his trade at Mechelen in Belgian football.
Oh, yeah.
And he's playing most weeks. He's had a couple of injuries. He's playing most weeks. And he is 27 years of age. And I agree with you. I think the best thing for him is to move on. Also, Ki Sung Young was another South Korean player that we had. He's still playing, JP. He's still playing. For FC Seoul, and he's only 33. Loved Ki Sung Young, thought he was tremendous. And one final thing, Stephen Welsh, if you look at his age at 22, and we're talking about him having to play football, he's a similar kind of group as Michael Johnson, who's 23. And I think that says a lot also about, that was if you're looking at the youngsters, and I know we've got Rocco Vatto coming through at the moment, but, that group are now 22, 23, JP. What happened to the ones behind them? Where are they? It's almost like, I don't mean a generation, but you're looking for players between the ages of 22 and 23, and then Rocco Vatto, who's only 17. That's a big gap. Where's all the players in between? And they've not been coming through. So that's another thing we need to consider. But I can see Welsh, talking to Belgian football, I can see Welsh doing a bit of a Hendry, doing a wee bit of a Jack Hendry here. I think he'll go away. He'll really prove himself, and it would not surprise me if he became a full international somewhere else, just by getting that game time, getting that experience. And I wish him all the best. I've always been a big fan of Stephen Welsh, but it just looks as though it's an impossible task for him now to get into this side. I'm going to bring up a few more comments. Stephen Sloan, regular contributor on the comment section. GG isn't a great striker, but I would have liked him to stay for another year at least. It's a strange one. He's not been a failure at the club, and to leave after being here for a year is bizarre. That's the thing. He's not been a failure. He's got a bit of a relationship with the fan base, JP. I said either earlier this week or maybe last week, I would have liked to have seen him playing a full season with no injury as a number one striker, because I think he would give you the return. He would give you the goals. But it's not going to happen while Kyogo's at the club. And he's at an age where he needs to play football again. So, the only slight concern I've got Right back, we've already got Johnston. We've seen him for a couple of games, and I think most of us have been pretty pleased with what we've seen. So Juranovic leaves the building. We wish him all the best. Giakoumakis, we're not as strong in that position at the moment. We haven't brought in Cho, and I already thought we needed another striker, even though we had Kyogo and Giakoumakis, and I think that's my main concern. And I even said last week, why not just keep him? Why not give him what he wants? But unless what he wants over the money is the first team football, JP, because you can't guarantee anybody that.
Nah, you definitely can't. Did you see VV Venlo shared on Twitter his debut?
I did.
He's got a hat-trick in his debut.
What a finish, the wee dink. What a finish that was.
That was lovely, yeah. I mean, and a penalty into the bargain as well, which he's not been too good at while he's been in a Celtic top. But
does that mean Moy's going to be on the penalties if JJ and Gigi will both leave?
Who knows? That's a good question. I don't know who would be the penalty taker, but we don't get many of them, do we? So
that's true. Why worry? That's why we're so bad at them. We don't practice them.
Some of the stats about the penalties that have been given and not been given to Celtic in the last 30 years versus, say, another club, it's absolutely wild. The stats, and you can say what you want, paranoia, all the rest of it. There's facts that have been laid out there to go. Wait a minute, why? Why
These
is
numbers
that?
don't stack up, JP.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I was saying that on Monday with Colin, right? And the reason I don't use words like corruption and cheating, the reason I don't use those words is because you can't prove it. You and I can't sit here and prove it. You might have a theory around it, right? I'm not dissuading anybody from using those terms. I won't use them because I can't prove that that's what's happening, right? But you can prove that bias occurs because it happens in every single walk of life. It happens in your workplace, my workplace. You've got them, I've got them. So why do you think for a moment that Scottish referees are the only occupation or the only race on this planet that don't have biases? Of course they do. So it's about combating the bias. And then obviously we know that there are people refereeing games that it's been laughed about, joked about. He was a mascot 33 years ago, now he's refereeing our game. All right, I'm sure that he will be absolutely balanced with his decision making. I remember reading a report back in the day that despite the preparation that you put into sport, into football, it was all around. Remember the rumour that Andy Cole and Teddy Sheringham didn't like each other? You remember that? There was something in the 4-4-2, and it was around the fact that might stop them from passing the ball to each other, even if it's the best option on the park. And they got the science, and it was all to do with bias. It was all about bias. I like him. I'm going to pass the ball to him more, even though Andy Cole's in a better position and he's a better player. So to think for a moment that referees walk out in that park without bias is unbelievably naive.
Did you hear the Kenny Clark? Did you hear the Kenny Clark thing?
What's the latest?
On BBC. Have you not heard it?
Was that? I think that was last week, wasn't it? It was Saturday. Was it Saturday last week?
I just listened to the podcast yesterday, as a podcast. I don't know if it was Saturday or not, but they had Kenny Clark on the line, and they had Michael Stewart, they had Tom English, Alan Preston, Rory. I can't remember his surname.
The commentator.
No. I can't remember it. They referenced there being some sort of referee forum day that James McFadden and this guy Rory went along, and I think Michael Stewart or somebody said that their tete-a-tete about a particular decision in a game had to, there was borderline. They were having to go outside to settle it outside because they got so heated in their debate. But one thing that they all unanimously agreed upon was the Matt O'Reilly penalty. They were all throwing that at Kenny Clark, and Kenny Clark was giving it the old, I've said before I came on here, I won't discuss individual incidents. The programme directors were made very well aware, as was Kenny, the host. So it was kind of a bit of a non-event in that respect, that he couldn't sort of enter into dialogue with Michael Stewart, who was going on about the Conor Barron penalty versus the Connor Goldson penalty. And then Tom English was just like, can you not, forget the paranoia thing, can you not see how Celtic fans would be perplexed at the fact that Bernabei penalty, the Matt O'Reilly penalty, the Smith penalty for Hearts that wasn't, and then you've got an incident like the Connor Goldson one where they're not. Can you not? And That's Tom English, who gets absolutely torched by people on a regular basis, Celtic fans as well. Well, quite a lot of Celtic fans, and he was basically going to bat for Celtic against Kenny Clark, and Kenny Clark's like, "Oh, I can't discuss individual incidents. Like, are you just going to wait until you're retired and you can do it after dinner speeches like other referees?"
Exactly. It's a credibility issue. It gets to the point, JP, that if you continually stand up for it and say that there's nothing wrong, there's no credibility there. I've used the words cheating and corruption. Yes, they have existed in Scottish football for decades, for generations. They have existed. And I use some of the examples on Monday when I was talking to Colin, the George Cadet affair, 1999. Jim Farry was sacked from his position after being found guilty of keeping a registration back, which prevented George Cadet from playing 6 games, including a cup game against Rangers in 1997. October 2010, the Doogie affair, where people admitted to lying. 5 people resigned. Hugh Dallas's emails then got fired about the place. This is a guy that's at the highest kind of point of Scottish refereeing, had to resign. Was probably forced to resign.
Which was also made fun of. That was just supposed to be passed off as banter. That's what we were told to expect anyway.
Exactly.
Much like the situation this week with Kyle Lafferty. Boo-hoo Kyle Lafferty, who's coming back from a 10-match ban and is doing star jumps and bringing breakfast to the manager, and all the press corps are all laughing about it. And you're like, if this was him having insulted a Muslim or a black
Islam, exactly.
What the hell would be going on? Like the guy's feet wouldn't have touched the ground; he'd have been gone.
But it takes somebody, JP, in that situation to challenge it there and then, and really be succinct in the challenge. It was a wee bit when you were talking about Beale going on about Ange and having the luxury. It took somebody at that point to hit him with some facts rather than just do the narrative thing, put it out as a story, get your clicks. No. Actually, hit him with some facts and say that is unacceptable in McInnes's case, or that's incorrect in Beale's case, and it didn't happen. And I also, by the way, stated that I'm well aware that under the SFA's watch, there has been plenty of cheating and corruption when you talk about everything that's happened over the last 20 years, maybe even longer in Scottish football. So I get that. And obviously, worldwide, I mean, the highest authority in football were corrupt. So I get that it happens, but until I can prove that it happens, I can't call it that. What I will say, though, is obviously there's bias. There's only one referee for sure that I know, cast iron, isn't a Rangers fan. There will be others, but I know for sure that Kevin Clancy's not a Rangers fan, and he's not a Celtic fan either. And I know that 100%. But the rest of them, the jury is definitely out, as are pictures in Rangers bars and pictures of being a mascot 33 years ago.
Which was compared to, was it Andrew Smith, the journalist, said, isn't that the same as maybe someone seeing Willie Collum going to Mass on a Sunday? And you're like, whoa, hold on a minute. That's not the same. I'm sorry.
It's not the same. And by the way, Andrew Smith's tremendous. And I like the way that he challenges the narrative. He really does. Former Celtic View editor, I would suggest perhaps of a Celtic State of Mind. And but I did see that comment and I thought that was a bit wide of the mark, I've got to say.
Maybe he was just putting it out there as a thought bubble or whatever you want to call it, but it's certainly not something I would subscribe to. I mean, no way.
No way. I mean, that's like calling Paul John Dykes a Tory. That's what happened on Twitter this week.
Well, we had a Tory podcast. I mean, I'm a regular Tory voter, as everyone that knows me would know.
It's bizarre, JP, right? It's bizarre that these things get thrown out on social media and become fact within a certain group of people. I'm the son of a striking miner, right? Anybody going 12 months without a wage with 4 bairns in the house and a coal fire house where your dad no longer gets coal for his fire, didn't call me a Tory. I mean, it is the worst thing. I'd rather be called just about anything else on the planet than a Tory.
I don't think I've ever experienced rage inside myself as the moment that David Cameron was filmed saying that he had the pleasure of phoning the Queen to tell her that the independence vote had failed, and he said, "Oh, she purred down the line." I'm not a violent person, but my God, this was a guy that like 3 days prior to that had been up here running around Glasgow trying to curry favour with people because he realised that it was closer than he actually thought it was with regards to the independence vote. So absolutely no chance in hell am I a Tory. Do I have any association with the Tories? and I completely refute any no mark on Twitter saying that we are Tories or I am a Tory or anyone is a Tory on this podcast, because I certainly don't think they are. I don't know everyone personally, but I highly doubt that anybody would put pen to paper on a Tory vote.
No, I mean, my politics, it probably hasn't changed throughout my life, maybe other than, you become an adult and probably your young politicised self becomes a wee bit more refined. My politics, for argument's sake, if anybody out there thinks I'm a Tory, I want, in my lifetime, an independent Scotland, a united Ireland, and the abolition of the monarchy. That's my politics. Simple as that, JP. And if anybody says otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about. The Killing Moon, afternoon, Acsom, see you all at an audience with Martin O'Neill. By the way, I cannot wait for that. He's been on that bucket list. It's sold out in like 40 hours, to the point where there's a waiting list at 100 for that gig as well.
Wow.
I cannot wait. I just find him an intriguing man to listen to. I've never had the pleasure of talking to him. I know you have a few times, JP.
I mean, in a wee guy capacity, I've not exactly become pals with him or anything like that. I approached him at a buffet at an after party, and he was very, very kind to me and listened to my Seville story. By the way,
I'll need to remember my Seville programme, actually, when I meet him. I'm going to proper fanboy him before that, I've got to say.
I mean, why wouldn't you? But something happened yesterday. Somebody I took a picture of in Seville in the ground. My mate Paddy Kelleher, who's from the Heriot Watt Celtic Supporters Club, he shared the picture that I took of him, Stevie Clark from E-Tims, long-term contributor to E-Tims. Who else is in the picture? I think Paul Riley, who started the Heriot Watt Celtic Supporters Club, he was in it, and Mark Sheffield was in it as well. Everyone bar me, and I'm so gutted that I don't have a picture of me in that ground. Just for posterity. I mean, I had a camera with me. I was taking pictures of the ground, of the game. I never thought to say to somebody, take a picture of me here so that I've got it for posterity. And when we got off the bus from Malaga to Seville, Billy Connolly walked by. I could have ran up to Billy Connolly and went, "Can I get a picture with you?" and got a picture. And that would have been my one memory of me in Seville with Billy Connolly. I mean, I'm kicking myself for not doing it. But I commented on the picture when it was shared, and it was shared as a memory. And I said, "Oh, I'm still gutted that I didn't get a picture myself." And then my mate James O'Donnell, who I went to Glasgow Airport with in the early hours of the morning of the game, bearing in mind I didn't have a flight at that time. I had a ticket for the game, but I didn't have a flight. He went, "Yeah, but you did get on STV News though, didn't you?" And I went, "Wait a minute, I've got no recollection of this at all." And apparently, according to him, when we were in the queue to board the flight, the STV News came over and interviewed us, and I don't remember it. I mean, I was a little bit 3 sheets to the wind at the time, because we'd arrived at the airport at like 1 a.m. and we'd been drinking, like not sculling pints, but we'd been drinking. And I need to find this footage. I do know a couple of people that work at STV, and I'm going to be like,
get into the archives, dig into the archives.
I was watching The Boys from Seville, which is like a 3-parter on YouTube, where there's like all STV, in the build up to Seville, and there's the Indian guys that cancel the wedding, like that old classic clip where the guy's like, "I heard you say," and it's like, we're supposed to be in Lahore for a wedding, and he just like phones his wife and goes, "Oh, really sorry, we went on a stag do to London, and we've ended up in Seville for the Celtic game." And you're like, surely that isn't real. Surely there wasn't like a full-on family wedding about to happen. And
we need to get them on the podcast. We need to get them on the show.
That would be brilliant.
If you're listening, get in touch. By the way, talking of getting in touch, Martin Heaney points out that the Facebook page is much, much better. That is because, Martin, Paddy Sinnott, who you will see on a Wednesday on A Celtic State of Mind, Paddy from Vital Celtic is now looking after it. So thank you to him. He's looking after the page for us, because once it gets to that stage and there's 20,000 odd on it, it becomes very difficult to manage. And Paddy, thankfully, is looking after it for us. wee bit about the game on Saturday then, JP. Second time in a week that we're facing Derek McInnes's Kilmarnock. He reckons this is the best Celtic side he's faced. What do you think of that comment first? What do you reckon of that? I mean, he obviously faced the Invincibles.
I don't doubt that it comes from a place of truth. I don't think he would just put a soundbite out there for no reason. And he's seen it from a different perspective, in that he's watching how his players, who he knows really well, how they are probably struggling to cope with the intensity of what Celtic do to them. Because the narrative the next day was that Celtic, who struggled yesterday against Kilmarnock, and then you look at the stats for the game and you're like, if I was looking at those stats, I wouldn't look at them and without having seen the game and go, we struggled. The first half wasn't the best, but we got a goal just before half time and that opened it up. And in the second half, it could have been any score we wanted it to be, but for some luck on their part in terms of shots hitting the post and bar and everything else. But I think McInnes is probably being honest about what he's seen, and I don't think it's mind games, really. I don't think he's. There's no point really in adopting mind games at this stage, because Ange Postecoglou won't allow them to enter into his thinking in terms of the guy's too wily a character to think, oh well, you said that we were the best team. We're going to go into this game on Saturday thinking we're the best team and that you're not a challenge. It's a blank. It'll be a blank slate for Saturday. And as far as Celtic and Kilmarnock go, last week won't be, I don't think, considered. And just said many times he doesn't focus on the past, focuses on the present and the future. So he's not going to look at last week as a barometer of what we will or won't do on Saturday, because it's a completely different game, different pitch, different stadium, different competition.
He raised that, yeah.
There's so many different variables on it, and things can change week to week, day to day in football. So the players will be focused on that game, and the game last weekend will be out of their minds. It's weird that it's on a Saturday night at 5:30. I'm glad I got a ticket. I got a ticket through Celtic, which is a rarity these days, because I mean, people think that I get tickets, or we get tickets as people on this podcast for nefarious reasons because we do a podcast. We absolutely don't.
That has been suggested.
I'm a season ticket holder, but in the eyes of Celtic, I don't have like this huge point. Even though I go to games regularly, I am constantly struggling to get a ticket for away games.
Talking about the games. Brian Cannon up at Celtic Park.
I saw that, yeah.
Well, that came from you. I mean, that came from King Tut's and everything that developed after it. But
that was there was tickets available, and he got a couple, and that was cool. But as regards to away games, zero chance of Ibrox, zero chance of Tynecastle, zero chance of Easter Road. The fact that I'm on the Home Cup ticket scheme is the only reason I've got a ticket for the game on Saturday, and I'm really glad that I didn't have to scramble about trying to get a ticket from friends or supporters clubs that I used to be in, or I am in, for Saturday. So it is a bit of a weird kick-off time. I'm looking forward to it, though. It'll be under the lights at Hampden. It was great. The cup final when we were under the lights was special, especially with the smoke bombs and all that. It just created this really kind of mystical atmosphere.
It did. And the imagery that came from that. There's some amazing images down the years. That's why I was really critical, I've got to say. I know this is a nuance of Celtic, but the new graphics around the stadium, I just thought they were really corporate. You know what I mean? Yeah, we've got Big Billy with the cup and that, but most of it is just green and designs and patterns. And I just like, when you think of the imagery we've got as a football club, unbelievable, iconic images. And a lot of them came from that game, Kyogo. Unbelievable images from that game.
The video as well that exists from the Hibs end, when right after they've scored, and then like Cam Selleck's son put the countdown clock up to count down towards our equaliser, and then the winner was just like, it genuinely felt like I was going to float away. It was so good, like to see someone score a goal of that quality in a cup final again, when we hadn't had the opportunity to be at a cup final for 2 years. The last one being the December 19. It was December 19, yeah. When we scored with an offside goal.
Obviously.
Yeah. I don't. That has been brought up to level against the Goldson handball incident.
I seen one for 12 years ago popping up on Twitter. It's just absurd. One final question about Saturday. Then we've gone with Siegrist so far in the League Cup games. JP, I think that had there been no injury issues, that would have continued, right? Or do you think Andrew's looking at it and going?
I think if he started in a certain way, then he probably would have continued. But from what I've read and been led to believe, that Siegrist has got an injury of sorts, so I don't think that would then mean that it defaults to Scott Bain, who's not played for months.
Couldn't possibly.
So you would think it would be hard. And with regards to any other changes to the team, I don't really know what else would change massively. Maybe O'Reilly coming back in, possibly. Up front, I don't think it will change. There's been too much paper talk about Giakoumakis this week, I think, to even think about changing it up for him. I mean, I'd be hugely surprised if he started. But then Ange Postecoglou did say after the game last Saturday, he praised Giakoumakis for his efforts when he came on and showed pretty amazing sort of just tenacity and desire for someone that a lot of people probably think wants away or whatever, or isn't happy with the situation. He certainly didn't look that way last Saturday, but I would be surprised if he was to start at the weekend. I think it'll probably be more or less the same team. Greg Taylor will probably be a while out by the looks of it, or the sounds of it. Bernabe's got the opportunity. Bernabe's ball for Maeda, by the way.
That was sublime.
Yeah.
And another player that's coming for a wee bit of stick, I guess. But I think you play your guys in position if you can. And I know that it came out after the Rangers game that him and Jota were, John Hughes was talking about it yesterday. They were affected by the bug, the virus that was going through the squad. So you understand probably after the event why Juranovic comes in, as well as the fact that he had been through that before, left back Ibrox. But Johnson starts for me as well. I don't see there being any surprises whatsoever. I don't think Moy dropping out for O'Reilly really is a surprise. We'll just go back to McGregor, O'Reilly and Hatate. And like you say, Maeda, Jota and Kyogo up top. I reckon that'll be the team with a solid centre-half partnership of Starfelt and Carter Vickers. Now, Stevie boy, politics on Acsom give us more. Well, sometimes you've just got to put some people right now and again. That's all. That's what it comes down to. If we spent our whole life doing that, the whole show would be dedicated to it, to be fair. How can you help a Celtic State of Mind? Well, just give us a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. We're going to pull out the winner of the latest prize. There's a few prizes running at the moment, JP. So today, you could be the winner of a vintage one-off concept jersey from Adidas from the kind of mid-80s with the stripes all the way down the sleeves, the trefoil on there, big shamrock on it. Check out the socials. All you do is subscribe. If you're a new subscriber or existing, you'll be thrown into this prize draw. We've also got 2 tickets for the Wim Jansen event next year. This year now. We'll be drawing that tomorrow. Celtic socks, believe it or not, the draw will be made on Saturday as well. So loads happening. And next week, we've got a couple of pairs of tickets for the sold-out Brian McClare gig that have been given to us by some listeners who have allowed us to chuck them into the prize draw. All you need to do is subscribe if you haven't done so already. We'll also be talking to Danny McGrain in March if you fancy coming along. Ticket link is underneath the video. Always an absolute pleasure talking music, football and politics with JP Mason. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. Tune in again tomorrow at 12:30 for a Celtic State of Mind.